Okay, we are in John chapter 5, as I mentioned a while ago. And I want us to begin with the witnesses of Christ. And that is going to start in verses, about verse 31, about 31. I hope you're continuing to read, in your commentary, some. Now what's going on in John 5? What's going to happen in 6 is very similar to what's happening in 5. You have the sign, and then you have the setting, the sign, and then the narrative. The Lord's discourse. Based upon what He's just done. So in John chapter 6, we're going to have Him going over to the east side of Galilee, what we would know today as the Golan Heights, and then He's going to feed the 5,000 plus people, because the 5,000 men, that just means the male people, so it'd be several thousand people, including wives and children and so forth. And then you're going to have the discourse on the bread of life. So chapter 5 and chapter 6 are very much alike as far as the layout, is concerned. Okay, let's look at John chapter 5, beginning in 31. Previous to this, Jesus has been talking about His close relationship with the Father. And you remember we went over that, the Father has authority, Jesus has authority, the Father gives life, Jesus gives life, and so forth. And similarly, so whatever the Father does, Jesus does. Now, Jesus is going to give some witnesses, for Himself. The background of this, it would be Deuteronomy 17:6, and also Deuteronomy 19:6. No, 19. Somebody check me out. 19:25, I think, in Deuteronomy 17:6. All right, am I right on that? Deuteronomy 17.
19 doesn't have 25 verses.
Oh. 19:15. You had a 5 in there somewhere. I actually knew that, Brother Jonathan, but I was just kind of testing you a little bit. No. Okay, and also 17:6. Okay, so what do those verses say? For something to be established, it must be in what?
Must be witnessed by 2 or 3.
2 or 3 witnesses. Okay? All right, so notice what Jesus says in chapter 5:31. If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. And then He says there are others who bear witness of me. Now let's think about this just a little bit. Notice, if I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. Now, hold that place and turn to John chapter 8. In John chapter 8, verse 14, Jesus says, even if I bear witness of myself, my witness is true. Now, the skeptic would say to us, well, you've got a contradiction in the Bible, because 5:31 says His witness is not true, and 8:14 says that His witness is true, if just of Himself. Jenny?
Take into account, it says, even if I bear witness. So He's saying...
You're in 8:14?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I bear witness of myself. So He's saying, most of the time you have to have other people to corroborate, but even if I say...
Yeah, but in 14, Jenny, He's saying, even if I just bear witness of myself, my witness is true. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, but in 5:31 He says you could add the word even on 31 if you wanted to. Even if I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. Okay, Doug?
Could there be a timing reference here? In other words, if I came in and I told you something about myself, you don't know if it's true or not. But if after a certain amount of time, other people know it's true, and then I tell it, then...
Yeah.
Could that be possible?
Yeah, maybe. I was trying to give us a little introduction by introducing you to the Deuteronomy passages. For something to be established, it has to be in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And so John?
I think the confusion is we tend to read that and think it's testifying before 2 or 3 witnesses, which is not what it means. It
No.
means you need to have at least 2 people give witness or give testimony, like you would in a court.
Yeah,
You don't, just because you do it before 2 or 3 people, that's not qualifying. You got to have 2 different people that are witnesses.
yeah, yeah. It's calling witnesses. It's like when Jesus was on trial. It says that they, sought false witnesses, but found none. And then it says that they did find false witnesses. So what's the idea there? At his trial, the idea is they sought false testimony against Jesus, but guess what? They didn't find any, but they did find some people who would bear false testimony against Jesus. I think the answer here, Brother Doug, for me is this. In the mind of the Jew, it had to be, for something to be established, it had to be in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, okay? And so I think you have to read 5:31, that what the Lord's saying there is from the Jewish perspective. You see what I'm saying? But then in chapter 8, Jesus basically says, it doesn't matter if I have additional witnesses or not, because I'm God. And if I'm God, then I know that whatever I say about myself, even if I say it, Jenny, then guess what? It is what? It is true. Okay, so in 5:31, you've got Jesus saying, in essence, according to you guys, y'all want 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay, I'm going to give you about 4 more. Okay? All right, what's the first one that he does in 32? There's another who bears witness of me, and I know that the witness which he witnesses of me is true. Maybe not. I think the another there refers, I don't think John comes up, Jenny, until 33. So you have sent to John, and he is borne witness, of the truth. I think the another in verse 32 is the Father in verse 37. So in my commentary I said Jesus' own testimony was insufficient to verify his claims. Truthfulness can never be substantiated by making the claim, for oneself. And then I go to chapter 8 and explain what I just did. Yes, sir?
Right there in 32, the New King James capitalizes the word he, which would definitely be in reference to God.
Yeah. If the interpreter is correct, I'm not an interpreter. If the translator is correct.
That's what you said, though. It's God the Father.
Right. On page 229, I say Jesus did not find the another, but it's plain that he's speaking of the Father and not John, since he did not receive testimony from man, according to verse 34. One thing to remember, the top has been left off of this, and you know what that means.
Definitely use that.
It is definitely bitten the dust. I can see why they left it off. It won't go on there. Okay, see how my mind does? What were we doing?
Talking about the witnesses.
Yeah.
Dave,
Yes, sir.
In a court of law, or even in this setting right here, or with Christ and the Jews, this whole matter of one person making an accusation about another person,
Mhm.
or a dispute between those two, there must be those 2 or 3 others that are witness to it, or no conclusion can be made.
Right.
That's the whole point of this, is that no conclusion can be made, but they stack the deck against it.
Right. See, in John 8, you remember in the case of the adulterous woman, okay? She has all these accusers, and you remember the story there. Well, then when Jesus rises up from writing on the ground the second time, they're all gone. And so Jesus says to the woman, where are your witnesses? And she says, I have none. And so Jesus basically says,
So
well,
there's no conclusion that can be made because of witnesses. It literally is just leave it off.
mhm.
You may carry it inside of you, but leave it off.
Okay. All right. All right, thanks. Anybody else?
David,
Yes, sir.
you mentioned earlier that skeptics use this verse 31 in order to agree.
Yeah, I'm saying they could.
Well, they do.
Oh, okay.
Stephen Wells wrote the Skeptic's Bible,
Uh-huh.
and that he uses this very verse.
Oh, does he?
In
Okay.
order to show Christ is a liar.
Right.
I have a copy of that
Huh.
Bible. It's
Wow.
it's the old King James.
Yeah.
If you would ever like to,
Huh.
I'll be happy to.
Yeah.
loan it to you.
Yeah, that's probably in a book I've got. I've got several books on alleged discrepancies,
Yeah, right.
and that's probably. All right, I know what I was going to say. Doug, on the pronoun there, one thing we need to remember is in the original language, you know, there were no distinctions made in pronouns. You know, the pronoun used for men was the same pronoun used for deity. A lot of people are not aware, you know, of that, but you know that's the case. This comes up because I've edited 30-something lectureship books, and the question's always, well, you know, do we want writers to capitalize, you know, pronouns referring, you know, to deity, and or words referring to deity like he, him, and so forth. And my conclusion would be, if you're going to do he and him, you need to do my, you know, mine, and you know, if you're going to be consistent, you got to do all of it, right? But you're definitely right here, though, Doug. You know, the he there refers, you know, to the Father. That comes up, you know, later on in verse number, where was it? 37. Yeah. Okay, so there's another who bears witness of me, and I know that the witness which he witnesses of me is true. You've sent to John, and he has borne witness of the truth. I do not receive testimony from man, but I say these things that you may be saved. Now that raises a question. Why does Jesus refer to John's testimony? Well, he didn't need testimony from men, because he just said that, correct? All right? Everybody with me on that? So why did he appeal to John's testimony? It says he does it in order that they may be saved. Now what sense does that make? The acceptance of John's testimony, which they had heard, would bring about belief. And that belief in turn would lead to what? To salvation. And so this shows, I think, how Jesus, you know, the regard that he has, you know, for John's, you know, testimony about himself. See, about Jesus, John's testimony was very, very important. I mean, it was very significant. And people, there was great respect for John, in spite of what Herod ended up doing, you know, to him. But I think that's the reason that he appealed to John's, you know, testimony. He was a burning and shining light, and you were willing for a time to rejoice in his light. So can you see now why he might be appealing, you know, to John? But I have a greater witness than John, and it's the works which the Father has given me to finish. The very works that I do bear witness of me, that the Father has sent me. Okay, what works is he talking about? It'd be what works? More than likely, the signs, correct? How many signs have we got already? We had the water to wine. I mean, that would have impressed me. And then what else? What's the next one?
The man by the pool.
Okay, the nobleman's son, right? In 4. And then what, in 5, Jenny? The man by the pool. Okay. And so we've got 3 signs already. So see, Jesus can say, well, I've been doing these signs, and they say something about who I am. I mean, you haven't seen any, you know, your average Joe, you know, doing the kind of things, you know, that I'm able to do.
The Jews thought to go get 1, 2, or 3 more witnesses. Christ in his physical, these things that they're accusing of in the physical world, and a multitude of witnesses.
Right. A lot, didn't he? All right, in 37, I'm sorry.
They turned a blind eye.
Right. In 37, he says the Father bears witness of him. Now, where does the Bible say that the Father bore witness of Jesus? You remember? Okay, at his baptism. All right, that is, I got to try my new marker out here. Matthew 3, the baptism. And then Matthew 17, the transfiguration. Somebody turn to John 12, 28. And read that for me. Jonathan, I hope I got the right verse. I'm gonna try my little makeup bag here, according to Jerry. Thank you, Jerry.
Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again.
Okay, who's that? That's the Father, isn't it? Voice came from heaven. So, got a comment? Nobody? Okay, that's the only 3 times I can find where the Father, actually spoke. In Matthew 3, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. In Matthew 17, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. What? Hear him. That's the only difference, in the two settings. Okay, let's look at the next one. And this is a long section. It goes from 39 to 47. You search the Scriptures. Now let me pause right there just for a moment. You search. Hang on just a second. I want Carol to get mad at me. Now, I know you don't know anything about Greek, or at least some of you don't, maybe. All right, this can be, according to the Greek word, it can either be imperative, in the imperative mood, or the indicative. If it were imperative, what would it be saying? That's a command, right? So what would Jesus be saying, Brother Jonathan? Yeah, you must search the Scriptures. But the same word can indicate the indicative, which is simply saying you are searching the Scriptures. Scholars differ on it. I think it's the indicative. Not that I'm a scholar, but that's just my conclusion. Because according to Jewish thought, searching the Scriptures was an end in itself. I don't know if you knew that or not. I mean, just all of their reading and their study and all of that, that was sort of considered the end. I think I have a comment on that somewhere. Let's see if I do. Rabbi Hillel says something to this effect when he says, the more study of the law, the more life, the more schooling, the more wisdom, the more counsel, the more understanding, and so forth. So I think what Jesus is saying here is this: you are searching the Scriptures, in them you think you have eternal life, and these are they which testify of me. See, he's not commanding them to search the Scriptures. He is saying, guys, this is what you're doing. You're searching the Scriptures all the time. That's what you do. You search the Scriptures. But the very Scriptures that you're searching are the Scriptures that are telling me, that are telling about me, namely Jesus. You see that? But you're not willing to come to me that you may have life. All right.
It's interesting, Mr. Light.
Yeah, David.
That he talked about John just a few verses before that, John the Baptist. That he talked about him, and he was obviously prophesying lately about, and some of them probably heard him, probably.
Yeah.
Did,
right.
That he was talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
And he brings that right back, you know.
He over and over. John's been telling about me. You know, the scriptures have been telling about me. You guys have been reading them for hundreds of years, and you're just going through sort of the motions, you know, as it were, though. All right, now let's look further. I want to finish this if I can. I know I'm hurrying a little bit. Let's see. Okay. But you're not willing to come to me that you may have life. We read that. I do not receive honor from men, but I know you, that you do not have the love of God in you. All right, now, I just think a lot of times in our Bible study, brethren, we just read verses like that and then we don't comment on them and so forth, but that's just really not my style. I want to know, what does that mean? Why all of a sudden it seems out of the blue that Jesus says, I do not receive honor, you know, from men, or glory. The New American Standard has glory. What is he saying there? I do not receive honor. If he was the kind of Messiah that they were looking for, then guess what? They would have what? They would have accepted him. They would have given him honor. But he's not going to receive honor from them because, you know, he's not who they, you know, really looking for, you know, to start with.
Even the apostles didn't understand that he didn't come here to make an earthly kingdom until late into it.
Yeah, late. I mean, even in Acts 1:6, you know, Lord, will you restore the kingdom to Israel now? So they were not even convinced at that time. That's another lesson for us. We need to remember about just faith development in general. It saddens me a little bit when, you know, someone obeys the gospel and then maybe in a class or something they make some kind of remark that is, you know, not founded in Scripture, and then sometimes we just go berserk, you know, about that. And my thought is, let's try to help that person, because I mean they've just come out of baptism, and there's still a whole lot of work, you know, that they've got to do in their own, you know, spiritual, you know, journey. And look at the apostles. I mean, those guys were lost, you know, to a great extent. And so I know I found this in my own experience with students. You know, students would want to come talk to me about something, and I'm thinking, good night. I worked that out 50 years ago, you know, but they have not worked it out. You see, they are where I was, you know, 50 years ago. And I think sometimes, do y'all think we forget that sometimes? You know, we're thinking, well, what's wrong with that person over there? Why don't they understand, you know, that it's just automatic that we don't have women preachers. It's just automatic we don't have women elders, or it's just automatic we don't have a piano in the church, or, you know, in worship or whatever. And sometimes they just have not had enough growth yet, you know, to understand, you know, what we understand. And I just think we should give them a little bit of time and try to help them. Isn't that what we're supposed to do as God's family? You know, to help one another. I mean, look at Apollos. I mean, good night. Apollos was way off the map, wasn't he? And Aquila and Priscilla, you know, took him to the side and you know, talked to him and showed him the way, you know, more perfectly. Y'all have an observation you'd like to make on that? Disagree or agree? One thing I like about our class, we can say what we want to say, and you're not going to be, at least for my part, you're not going to be looked down on, castigated, or anything else. You know, the only thing I want to know is what the book says. I want to go by the book. That's what y'all want, you know, too. And if that's my attitude and if that's your attitude, then we're going to get along, you know, great. Okay? Bye, Chase.
Yes, sir.
Okay, do what you can for Jerry. Okay. All right. Okay, let's see. You don't have the love of God in you. Now, why would he say that? Well, they rejected, I'm sorry, Elena? Yeah, John 2:25, he knew what was in man. But he's the light. Jesus is the light coming into the world. Who sent Jesus into the world? You know, the Father. Why did he do that? You know, because of his love for his Son and love for mankind. And what did the Jews do? This goes back to John chapter 1, 10, 11, 12. They rejected him. And what are they doing? When they rejected him, they did what to the Father? They rejected the Father, rejected his love. I've come in my Father's name and you don't receive me. If another comes in his own name, you will receive him. How can you believe who receive honor from one another and do not seek the honor that comes from God? Do not think that I shall accuse you to the Father. I love this. I shall accuse you to the Father. See, Jesus is saying, don't even think that I need to accuse you before the Father. Why is that, Jesus? There's one who accuses you, Moses. Moses in whom what? You trust. And so, you know, later on he'll say, this is with the blind man. We're Moses' disciples. So see, I mean, Moses is like the epitome. You remember in John 6, Moses, you know, gave us bread from heaven. Jesus says, no, it wasn't Moses that gave you bread. You know, God gave you bread. But anyway, Moses is just, I mean, he's on the top. All right, what's Jesus saying here? Moses wrote about me. Deuteronomy chapter 18. You remember Moses said, one of these days a prophet's going to be raised up. He's going to be from the people. He's going to be like me, and you must listen to him. And if you don't listen to him, you're going to be destroyed. Now that's what Moses said. And so I just love the way Jesus turns, you know, their own law, you know, on them. And frequently, another thing to be aware of as we study, Jesus will say, it is written in your law. See, it's not as though Jesus does not claim the law himself. Are you following me? But why would he say it's written in your law? He's trying to emphasize something, isn't he? John?
Because they ought to know it.
He's saying the very thing that you search all the time, the very thing that you take so much pride in, that is the very thing, you know, that is written about me. Okay? All right. Okay. For if you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you don't believe his writings, how will you believe my words? All right. Every time I read this, I think about the rich man in Luke 16, 19 through 31. You remember in Luke 16, 19 to 31, that's the rich man and Lazarus. And you remember the rich man was pleading, you know, for Jesus to at least let Lazarus, you know, go back and talk to his brothers. Remember that? And Jesus said they've got Moses and the prophets. And the rich man said, oh no, but if Lazarus tells them, you know, from the dead, they'll believe him. What did Jesus say? If they don't believe Moses and the prophets, then they're not going to believe somebody if they arose from the dead. Now, what do y'all think about that? I used to think that, I don't know, if somebody rose from the dead, that might cause me to believe a little, you know, quicker or stronger than just reading it on paper.
If you wanted to believe it, people believe what they want to a lot of times in spite of whatever evidence there is for or against it.
Okay.
And the Jews were like that. They did not want to give
Right.
up being God's special people and their genealogies and their traditions and all. They didn't want to give all that up. Their livelihoods, all of that. They didn't want to give that up.
So they would believe Moses and the prophets if they really sought truth and if they really wanted to believe it.
I mean,
Okay.
people are still like that.
Right. Surely not, are we?
And we're on this side of one who wrote it.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing though, isn't it? It's like in John 6. I've been studying for John 6 today. And so that's the reason it keeps popping up in my head. You know, Jesus feeds all these thousands of people. And then right after that, you know, they say to Jesus, you know, show us a sign that we might believe. This is in verse 30. What sign will you perform then that we may see it and believe you? I'm thinking, you knuckleheads. He just fed thousands of you with what? 2 fish and what was it? 5 loaves? Anyway, so thank you, Jenny. That's very correct. All right, y'all got a comment? Anybody?
They're still looking today.
All right, here, correct, Dennis.
They're still looking today.
All right, I tried to put just a few concluding thoughts here. The confrontation here in chapter 5 began with an attempt on the part of the Jews to convict Jesus of violating the law of the Sabbath as taught by Moses, and it ended with Jesus having convicted them of rejecting the law and the lawgiver on whom they based their hope. Furthermore, with this chapter, we see that the opposition against Jesus is rising. Remember what I told you about starting in John 5, about verse 16? An opposition that will eventually culminate in his crucifixion, which was justified, ironically, by an appeal to the law of Moses. For readers like us, there is an implicit invitation to understand and believe in Jesus and the law of Moses in a way that many Jews of Jesus' day did not. Any observations? All right. Jesus' power knows no obstacles. What's that about? That's about healing the man, isn't it? Jesus' miracles were instantaneous. You know, some of these faith healers today, you know, I saw some program one time that worked on this guy and so forth, and then encouraged him to go to physical therapy. And I thought, that's not the way the Lord did it, is it? Okay. Jesus often colored outside the lines to challenge the traditions of men. What's that about?
He healed on the Sabbath.
Yeah. He was on, you know, he did his work on the Sabbath. But what he did not violate the true nature of the Sabbath, did it? Okay, Jesus is equal with God. Both the righteous and unrighteous will be resurrected. We talked about that last week. It's possible to know the Scripture and not know God. How about that?
That's the Jews.
Is that possible? Is it possible today for people to know the New Testament and not know God? Is it possible to know Scripture but not understand Scripture?
You have your own understanding of it.
Jenny?
Have your own understanding
Okay.
of it.
Okay. Who else?
Be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving your own self.
Okay.
Study to show thyself.
Jill?
Study to show thyself.
Okay. It just always, you know, amazes me that, you know, like Mark 16:16, I think I did this, I think I did a lesson on this. Maybe I didn't, I can't remember. He shall be saved. And what he is it that's going to be saved? The he who what? Believes and is what? Baptized. Okay, now, I mean, anybody who knows anything about the English language can see that that's diagrammed properly. He is the simple subject, shall be saved is a simple verb, and then you have these dependent, you know, clauses here, right? Okay, so to me this is an example of where people can know something but not understand it.
I think they call it spinning these days.
Spinning? Okay, what spin are you going to do?
They'll take a verse or whatever and spin it.
Yeah.
Like politicians do to
Yeah.
suit themselves.
I think we've seen that on the news maybe sometimes. Or, yeah, especially with politicians. Seek the glory that comes from God and not from men. To believe Moses is to believe Jesus. All right. Comments? Okay, chapter 6. Yay. Moving on, huh? All right. Chapter 6. There's one of these chapters, I think it's 6, it has 71 or 2 verses. Let me see. I think it's 71, right. And I never will forget, because for 3 years, in all my meetings I literally took my work, and then I took a little fold-up table, and I took the table in the hotel room and my table and, set up a place to study. And I remember distinctly, where I was when I made the comments on verse 71. That was the longest chapter to get through, and it is the longest chapter in the Gospel, of John. I think I've told you that the chapters are pretty long, though they vary in length, through chapter 12, and then things, get a little bit, shorter, from there on till at least until we get to the arrest and trial, of Jesus. Okay.
It also seems to have more red letters, more than what Jesus himself said than a lot of. Right.
Well, here's you might not remember this, just talking to you in general. Chapter 1:1 to 1:18 is what's called the prologue. Chapter 21, 1 through 25 is what's called the epilogue. Look at those as two bookends. Okay, chapter 1, verse 19 through chapter 12, verse 50, that's the last verse of chapter 12, is what is called the public ministry of Jesus. Okay? And what is he doing there? Red letter. He's preaching, he's teaching, he's performing his miracles. See, his last miracle is chapter 11, with the raising of Lazarus. Okay? And then starting in 13:1 and going through the end of 17 is his private ministry. And then scholars vary on this, but the Passion, some believe, starts in 19, some say 18, but at any rate, and then in 18 you got the arrest, in 19 you got the crucifixion, in 20 you got the resurrection. And so after 12, he's not talking to people in general anymore. See, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, he's only talking to his disciples. Though there's things that he says to them that's applicable to us today. If you love me, keep my commandments, and so forth, okay? And then, how much does he say after he's arrested? Very, very little. Very, very little. And then he has, what's called the 7 words from the cross. I thirst, etc. I want you to see the kind of overview, of the way the gospel is flowing, okay? So see, we're in the midst of Jesus proving that he is the Christ. That's what's going on. Because what does 30:31 say of chapter 20? Many other signs truly did Jesus, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you might believe, and that believing you might have life. All right, let's look at the bread of life, chapter 6. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Let's see if I got a map here. Okay, first of all, is it the Sea of Galilee? Is it the Sea of Tiberias? Or is it the Sea Kinnereth? Which is it, Brother John?
Depends on what time in history, I guess.
Okay, tell the class about Kinnereth.
I guess that'd probably be the oldest one.
That's okay, it is. That's from the Old Testament, isn't it? I don't have the verse right in front of me, but where is that? Well, I forgot what verse it is in the Old Testament, but it's based on a Hebrew word that signifies a lyre. Am I saying that right? L-Y-R-E. Is that the way you spell the musical instrument?
Yes.
Is that it? Okay, and so I don't know anything about that. Who's my music people in here? Beth? Who? Who?
These two.
Oh, okay. Does that look like a lyre?
Yes, it does.
Little bit? Okay. Well, that's where you get Kinnereth from. Okay. I know y'all needed to know that information today. Okay. You couldn't have lived, without it, right? Okay. But notice that he goes over the sea. Now, how do we know? I'm going to say that he is, watch it, Cord. I'm going to say that he is right here. right in here. That's where the Golan Heights are, today. Okay? Now, how do I know that he went over here? I mean, where has he been in chapter 5? What's the setting of chapter 5? Is it not Jerusalem?
Yes,
Am I wrong?
you're right.
Okay, all right. So here he is, down here, then he goes over the Sea of Galilee. So there's something going on here that John didn't tell us about, right? He didn't tell us about him traveling and so forth at this point. But at any rate, he goes over the sea. Now, how do I know he went to this side? Because he commanded the disciples the next day to go. John does not say command, but other gospel writers do. Verse 17, they went over the sea toward Capernaum. So see, they left here and they went to Capernaum. So that's on this side. Okay? And Capernaum, remember this, it's kind of the headquarters in Galilee for Jesus. That's his headquarters. Okay? All right, looking forward to next week. Study chapter 6. Read your commentary. Read your Bible especially.